Ross Bessinger is this week's B&E guest. He breaks the traditional mold we have on this show. Instead of working at an advertising agency, this man is an administrative business partner at Google. Ross tells us what he does at Google, and I will hint that he creates unique experiences for Google employees in Chicago, but I'll have him explain the rest. But he graduated in 2018 with a degree in advertising. Today he works for that digital powerhouse we all know and love. But what I find super interesting, aside from his side hustle as a DJ, is that he was initially hired into the university program sector of Google. And as a coordinator of that university program, his goal was to increase student awareness of Google as a career path, and he knows what Google looks for in an application. And he sheds light on that in this Breaking and Entering episode. He rocks it, so please give it 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and be sure to follow us on Instagram at EnteringAd for his information and recommended resources. This is the Breaking and Entering podcast, and I am your accomplice, Gino Schellenberger. Kick it, Mikey. Ross Bessinger, welcome to the Breaking and Entering podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. The little B&E podcast action here.
Yep. We're going to break some rules, maybe some laws. First off, thank you for coming prepared. You have a great audio setup right now. I can always appreciate that.
Thank you.
Awesome.
It stems from as we dive in later, you'll learn about my audio past.
Yes, we will. And that to foreshadow a little DJ work, a lot of experience in that area, award-winning, I think even might be appropriate to say.
Yep.
Cool. All right. So Ross, you work at Google. First Google guy. We've had an Amazon guy. We won't talk about that, but you're our first Google guy. You graduated from the University of Illinois at Google. You are let's see if I get this right, tech site lead administrative business partner. And you've been doing that since July. Am I right on that?
Yep, that's correct. I am the Chicago Tech Site Lead Administrative Business Partner. It's a lot of words, but it makes sense if we want to dive in later to the title.
We're going to break that down real quick.
Cool.
But even before that, you were a university programs coordinator from September 2018 till June this year. So perfect guest when talking about this podcast where we target advertising students or any communication students. You know this pretty well, I'm sure.
Yeah. It was really interesting to go from being a student and then within a couple of months being on the other side, on a recruiting team, for lack of better words, at a major company. So yeah, it complete 180 and seeing both sides of that it's really something.
How was that? To make that transition, then it probably wasn't too rough, right? It's pretty a natural flow going from student seeking jobs to then seeking out students. You kind of get that. It just makes sense to me.
Yeah. Well, before I say anything dumb, I'm going to state that my views and opinions are my own and do not, reflect at all on Google's opinions or, whatever.
Yep.
But but now that that's out of the way, the transition was interesting, more interesting than you would think. When you're a student, you have a lot of people giving you advice from every direction. You have your professors, you have maybe older students that graduated already and are in the workforce that are telling you things. Your parents are probably trying to tell you something. You just have, it's like information overload. And once you come to the other side of it, it's like you just figure it out. It's like so clear when you're on a recruiting team what recruiters in the industry look for. Obviously what we were looking for when I was on a recruiting team is different than what a typical advertising agency might be looking for, but it's the same structure that you go with. And honestly, I don't want to throw shade at the U of I media school, but some of their advisors were just way off. They missed the mark by so much. And it kills me because you go to such a prestigious school like U of I, you graduate from an advertising program that is consistently in the top 10 in the country, yet you have advisors who have a hard time giving the correct advice, like how to structure a resume in 2020 and not 2000, because there's a
Mhm.
lot of differences there. So I think the transition was more complicated than it should have been, and it was more eye opening actually than anything else.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's interesting when you say advisors, I mean, are you talking about like the career service members within our department, or are you talking about like our academic advisors?
Don't hate me for saying it, but almost both. I didn't have a great relationship with that department. I probably had four academic advisors throughout my 4 years, just because they kept leaving or going to another school or
Sure.
university or whatever. So that made information not clear
Mhm.
because everyone has a different opinion. But more so the career advisement. I felt like the advertising program or the school of media was very set up to like it was basically a pipeline builder for the advertising agency world,
Oh yeah.
that is
Oh yeah.
Chicago or New York, right?
Yes.
If you want to go through the program and do anything but like be an account manager or a creative at an agency, you're kind of on your own.
Sure.
Um, which you know fast forward the crazy path I went down, which we'll dive into later, I'm sure. But that's how I ended up where I did, and it was all on my own. And so I'm happy to share advice and learnings from folks who go through the program or communications program, or who don't want to end up in an agency or only want to spend a minimal amount of time in an agency.
Right, right. So what were some of those things? I mean, the thing that popped in my head, if you're not getting that from the faculty at your school, then you kind of have to go all in on your extracurriculars, or you have to find somebody that's a mentor. AAF is something we talk about in every episode of this podcast, and I know you were also involved in the same chapter. So that I'm predicting that's going to be kind of what your theme was, finding different opportunities within organizations and different mentors that might have been older kids.
Yeah, yeah. At a certain point, you have to stop relying on the infrastructure that's there for you and
Yeah.
go create it yourself. And that's where co-curricular activities really, really thrive. And I've been a big, advocate for get yourself involved outside of the curriculum, all the way back to like my sophomore year of high school, um, because I'm one of those people who teachers always hated, who always challenged the status quo of like, okay, that's great, but why are we doing this, or what's the significance? And it wasn't because I was trying to be a smart ass in class. It was like I genuinely wanted to know what the purpose of what we were learning was, or how it was applicable, because I wanted to go out and make it applicable and do those things in real life to just build myself and learn from those experiences. And it's like I don't want to go too deep down this road, but the difference between getting a 99, 100% on a exam or in a class and getting a 92, 93% in a class, right? You might spend four extra hours to get
Mhm.
those, 7, 8 percentage points, which in the grand scheme of things is not going to matter like at all. And you can take those 3 or 4 hours of that week and go do something in the co-curricular space that's going to have a exponentially larger impact on your career, because one, you're building your resume with new
Yes.
things, but it's also like you are learning hands-on how to do things that you're actually interested in. Like, do I remember from like an advertising class how to calculate like certain target market demographics from some formula? Like, no, I don't. Do I care that I don't remember? No, because if I ever need to go do it, there's a great, place to go find it called the internet or YouTube, and you go look up how to do it. And it's not important, that I didn't spend the 4 extra hours studying that, and I spent the 4 extra hours doing something else that furthered my career.
Right. I think there's a point of diminishing returns when you're studying and for just your basic academic workload, right? Like you said, you can spend up to 4 hours and then you're gonna get an A, and then 10 hours total you're still gonna get an A. You're just wasting your time. So I think that's super important. Before we get into more advice, because this is awesome already. Usually it's towards the end, but tell us about what you do right now at Google at the tech site lead. What does that mean?
Yeah, so I partner with the Chicago Tech Site Lead. He is responsible from a technical perspective of all the engineers that sit in Chicago. So right now, that's about 350 and growing, and that he's responsible for like them. Not so much on a day to day basis, but on a you know Chicago site level, if that makes sense. I partner with him and excuse me, with him and all the other engineers in Chicago to build culture around the teams that sit in Chicago, along with different types of events for either specific teams or site-wide events. And my whole history, really, the one common theme is like creating experiences for people. And so the fact that I get to do that now for 350 plus engineers at Google in Chicago is amazing. And people ask me all the time, like, and you probably have it on your list too, is like, what is a typical day for someone in that role? And it's there is no typical day, because so many things are project based, and you walk into them on a day to day basis. Um, so, I mean, some examples could be I work on a music event in Chicago. We call it Fulton Palooza. The office sits in Fulton Market District of Chicago, and we coincide it with Lollapalooza. So we try to do like a music week in the office while the music week of Chicago is happening. So have different artists come in to do talks and performances, and that's like a culture event I do for the office. So cool things like that is what I like to do with my job.
Yeah. So you said you're creating experiences, and this is all internal stuff, correct?
Yeah, I'd say about, I mean, I'm in my current role, my new role as the Chicago Tech Site Lead ABP. I'd say 90 to 95% of what I do is all internal. There'll be the occasional, obviously things are different now with COVID, but,
Right.
I sit on the search team. So because of that, things like CES come around or other big shows and conferences where, we all kind of come together to work on larger experiences or help coordinate logistics to get the correct engineers to those conferences.
Yeah.
So like that side is external focus, but I'd say 90 to 95% of the events I do are internal.
So your client kind of is it fair to say your client are the 300 engineers in Chicago?
Yeah, I think that is very fair.
How are they as a client, those engineers?
Um, they're interesting. Some of them are great. Some of them are not so great. But
Sure.
it just kind of depends on what you're doing. And the key is, us who go through advertising and communications and sales like programs.
Sure.
What and this was part of adjusting to the world of tech in this role and my past role, because I was working with very like CS focused students in my past role and now engineers. Changing like what you would want to do at a quote unquote client event, right? If you're at an advertising agency or you're doing ad sales or whatever, your client's going to probably, you're going to go out to a baseball game or go on a boat from Navy Pier or like go out to
Mhm.
dinner or a bar or like something like
Hopefully
that.
soon. Yeah.
Yeah, like in a non-COVID world.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's not what engineers find to be the most fun, which is fine. Everyone has their own thing. So like right now we're doing a site-wide puzzle hunt where we hired in a third party to help custom build a 8-week long puzzle hunt. So virtually. So we have, about 150 of those engineers who signed up to participate, who are going to spend an hour or so a week like hacking through a puzzle
No
every week
way.
for 8 weeks. Yep.
That's
So like,
awesome.
yeah, and it's really cool because someone like you and I who like we're used to the other social
Yeah,
aspects
I would
of,
never do that.
yeah,
But
but
it's
it's
awesome that they love it.
fascinating. It's fascinating. So
Yeah.
as long as you like are on that, once you learn that kind of stuff and you shift your mindset a little bit and you open to like new ideas, like We
Sure.
did a like a Lego building competition. I love
Oh, nice.
Legos.
Sure.
I never admitted it to people because like I don't know, it wasn't like cool, but
Oh, yeah.
it's so cool. I mean, we had teams building the like the $2,000 large Star Wars kits that
Yeah.
they like all pitched in and bought. I mean,
Yeah.
it's so different than like the advertising world, but
But
it's
you're
amazing.
creating, like, you going back to your mantra, you're creating those fun experiences or those interactive pieces that make working at Google probably why it's so great to work at Google.
Yeah, yeah, and that's something that I love, right? Like the reason I came to the role I'm in now is because I spent 2 years talking about how great of a place Google was to work and to try and get students to want to come apply and work with us and work for us and hopefully they go out and start recruiting people on in their own time. And I wanted to become part of the reason why people talk about Google. So now that I'm in a position where I'm able to do that, I really need to capitalize on it.
Okay, okay. So now I'm curious. So this kind of sounds like you have some HR interest or background. What's the difference between your role now and just being some sort of HR department member?
Um, It's a great question. I think the difference is right, like, well, two things. One, HR is HR, and HR as a whole tends to have a negative connotation globally, no matter what company you're at, right? Like, oh, we're gonna
Thanks
get
to the
HR
office.
involved, or HR it planned this thing. Like, I don't know, right? Like,
Yeah.
we don't even call HR at Google. They're
What do
called
you call it?
people operations.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So that just
Mm,
right off the bat. But in the role I am, right, I sit like my ladder. I report into the search org within
okay,
Google. So like I sit on an engineering team, which by that nature I am closer to the folks doing that work. So
gotcha.
I'm able to have those conversations about life and events and what people want to do, what people didn't like to do, right? Where I feel like when you're coming from an HR side, it makes those conversations harder to have because I feel like people are more like they self
Distance.
restrict what they want to say, right?
Yeah,
Because they don't want to say something that's going to get them in trouble. You could hop on a meeting with me and scream at me for 30 minutes, and we're like,
sure.
okay, you didn't like what I did. We won't do that next time. Boom,
Right.
done. End of conversation. Um, yeah.
What are the so you mentioned a couple of your day to day, and you mentioned that your days never really look the same. What is like what's your favorite task to work on? Your favorite brief? Your manager says we need you to do this, and you love it. What's one thing that you absolutely hate that you're like, oh, I got to do this again?
um, the thing I love solving complicated problems, and that the definition of that has changed for me over the years, right? Most recently, I have taught myself AppScript, which is Google Drive's version of JavaScript, right? Which I in the last year I just recently have developed that skill. And
Nice.
did you know that you can have all Google products within Drive talk to each other and do things automatically, and you never have to look at it or touch it? Like that was new to me. That was news to me. So like that was a complicated problem I started to work on, and now like I'm always looking for that stuff. And I just had a conversation with my manager the other day of like, here are like 4 or 5 problems that exist across the 60 people on my team and how they interact with different Google tools. Like, how can we make their life easier, or how can we automate it through AppScript?
Hmm.
I'm not an engineer by trade, right? But like, I understand the use case because I live it every day. So if I can write like base code for it and then work with engineers to solve, like that's the kind of stuff I love to do because it's like literally problem solving and it's
Yeah.
different every time. So I love when I get asked to do those sorts of things.
And then you're also connecting with them even more. If you're going with them and you speak that language and you know what they're doing and you can connect on that standpoint, it probably makes your job a lot easier.
Yeah, I would like to think so. I hope so. You never know when you're going to get into a meeting and start talking and you're actually on the complete wrong path. And then an engineer
Sure.
who's been writing code for 15,
Yeah.
20 years goes, ha, you're
Y-
completely wrong, just
Yeah.
scrap the
He can
whole
roast
thing.
you.
Yeah,
Yeah. He
but
or she
but
can roast you.
Yeah, rightfully so, right? They've been doing it for a very long time.
Bring it on.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
All criticism is constructive. Most
That's right.
criticism is constructive.
Yeah, I'll buy that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
But least favorite. You talked about, you love solving complicated problems. What's your least favorite thing?
my least favorite thing is, with this role, there is some more like transactional work that comes with it, right? And it's all part of the process, right? Like
Mhm.
if I'm putting on a large event, right? Whoever we're hiring or contracting and to do certain things for the event, like they have to get paid somehow, right? And
Sure.
so like going through the tedious process of like submitting a payment order and making sure the invoices line up and making sure they get paid on time and like making sure money is moved around through all the different budgets to make sure that we can pay them properly. Um, right. Because if for instance, if I'm working on like a massive summer event for the Chicago office, even if it's just the 350 engineers, that comes out of the payment for that comes out of several different what we call like cost centers,
Sure.
um, so just like dealing with that is annoying, but like it's part of the job, and the job wouldn't be what it was if I didn't have access to like means to do that, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Gotcha. How many administrative business partners are at the are in the Chicago area, like similar to your role?
Yeah, so my role is very unique. Um, right, it my role doesn't exist in Mountain View because Mountain View is so big. I'm the only engineering AVP right now that sits in Chicago. There are a handful of folks in similar roles on the sales side, sales advertising side of the
Yeah.
house in Chicago. Um, so it's unique in that sense, but it's also unique because I partner with a someone who is the tech site lead for
Okay.
Chicago, right? Other ABPs don't have as much culture built into their role because they're not partnering with someone who like sits in the role who is responsible for doing those things or making sure those things happen.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so it's unique in both of those ways.
So, I mean, how'd you stumble upon it within Google? What made you say I want to do? What made you say, yeah, this is the right route for me? Because you stemmed from that um, university program,
Mm-hmm.
the university programs coordinator role. Um, yeah, what was that next step? How'd you find that next step?
Yeah, networking,
Yeah,
right? Like we stress it so much through. I know that's pushed by the university and by everyone who you talk to in industry, but a lot of it is about who you know and timing, right? So it came to the point where I was nearing 2 years on the other team. I was looking for what was next, and something that I fell in love with while working on the right. When you work in university recruiting, it's cyclical, right? Summers are slower than the fall. Fall's
hmm,
super super busy. You got internship recruiting, full time recruiting, whatever. The spring is
sure.
is heavy, but not as heavy. So in the downtime on that team, I was involved with culture stuff in Chicago. Right, I help run our Talks at Google program in Chicago, where we bring it's like our TED Talk series basically internally, and then
Yeah,
sometimes they end up on YouTube or they're live streamed.
sure.
So I was starting to get involved in like office culture, and I loved like this is a consistent theme with me, right? Is like I love the real time stress of planning and executing an event. There's nothing better than like shit. The event starts in an hour. Everything's a mess. What do you do? Go.
Oh,
Um, and some people hate it. I love it and I thrive in it. But like I wanted more of that. And so just like meeting with different people in the office who are involved in culture and the community, it happened that the person who is sitting in this role that I have now was moving on to the next step in her career. And so the timeline
yep.
just matched up. I had worked with her multiple times on site wide projects, culture wise, and so it just kind of lined up. I went and interviewed for it. The tech site lead and I got along very well, and yeah, that's just kind of how that happened.
Gotcha. Gotcha. A lot to unpack here. So I guess I want to. I mean, what we can talk about. I want to go over just like in my head. I want to lay out. I want to talk about how great it is to work at Google, like what it's really like. But before we
Okay.
get into that, I want to get into kind of working reverse now. I mean, how did you get out of college? How did you break into that first role as that the university programs coordinator? Like, what was that experience like?
Yeah, so I will take it back to that. Um, like I mentioned before, I knew I did not want to do advertising agency work.
Okay,
That was very clear. Right there were points throughout the curriculum at U of I where I was really into it, and right, I think one of those things. If you are an advertising student at U of I, you've done the capstone project in advertising where you like simulate an agency in a group. Like that was one of those moments where it's like, oh wow, this was a lot of fun. I can see myself doing it.
what
But
role?
I was a media planner for my group on that project.
Sure.
But I think what I found was I loved getting up and pitching things in front of people. I did
Okay.
not like the late nights random stuff you're trying to pull to please your client. Um, and like some of the agency culture of the agencies I went and visited in Chicago just seemed toxic to me. Right,
You want
like
to name them?
I prefer not to.
Let's do it. You could do it if you want.
No, I have friends that work at some of those agencies, and so I don't want to
Are they
put
still
any.
working there? What year did you
They,
graduate?
I graduated in 2018.
And they're all still there
Some of them are there. Some of them have left and came and done advertising at Google. Some of them have moved on to other worlds.
within 2 to 3 years. Okay,
Yeah,
this
yeah,
is good stuff to know. We
yeah.
want
I
to hear
think
this stuff.
I think agency burnout is real.
Yeah,
I think that right the saying that you're only as good as your last campaign. I think that is very true. I've had friends who like the agency as a whole didn't perform well on their client's campaign, and so they basically dissolved their team because they lost the client, and then they all got let go because you have this high paying client that just left the agency, and
right,
so now your team's gone. And
right.
so for how long do you want to deal with that or have that stress riding on you of
Yeah,
like we have to pull this off, like my job and career depend on me pulling off this campaign? Like yeah, when you're younger and you're fresh out of college, like that's great and go get it. Like you have that drive. But after a certain point in time, it's just like, I need something where I can wake up in the morning knowing I have a job and a paycheck and not having to worry about like obviously you need to perform. You need to perform in any job, but it's
right.
it's different. It's just different. Um and that was part of it. And the other part was like from older folks I knew who had already graduated in the agency world, I felt like there was a lot of backstabbing going on between people, right? Like coming out of school, coming out of the advertising program at U of I, like most people go on to the advertising industry in Chicago, right?
Yep.
So like people in the industry, and you might have in a group project over the years experienced like, oh yeah, buddy, right? Like this person's gonna help you and grow with you, and then all of a sudden they like turn around and throw you under the bus, right?
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
I've heard of that happening for like promotions and things of that nature at these agencies, and like people stealing people's credit for work or throwing their name on things but they didn't do anything. It's like toxic group project stuff that I didn't want to be a part of.
Yeah.
Where like at a certain point you just got to pull them aside and be like dude, grow up. Like either do your job and or don't, but don't sit here and try to lie to me or the manager or your professor and
Right.
say something otherwise. So that
Yeah.
was that. I also loved events, like I keep mentioning. I love these experiences. So that's another. Like I tried to find agencies that did that. Like I think Superfly, they have an office in Chicago. Red Frog Events I think they just closed though. Right, like C3. They do some festivals, including
Yeah.
Lollapalooza in Chicago. Like that was the kind of work I was looking to do.
Okay.
Like through senior year, that's where I was like applying and looking at and all that stuff. And then I graduated and I went on a trip. It took like a month off and went to Europe with my friends. We just went backpacking
Nice.
and I was like, you know what? I applied to a bunch of roles. I said I was going to be out of the country. Like last thing I want to do is give an interview on like a hilltop in Greece. But um, I came back and it was actually my girlfriend's sorority group chat. Someone had posted about an events role at a tech company. It wasn't specific. And I was like, yes, like I have been a tech geek like my entire life. I love these events. Like, what is this? I need to know. And then I just kind of went from there. It turned out it was the university programs coordinator role at Google,
Nice.
and just kind of went from there. Yeah.
So that was how many applies how many jobs did you apply for?
Oh boy, way too many. Way too many.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I feel like there's two ways to go through the job, application process. There's the, hey, I'm going to not critique, I'm going to shift my resume and my credentials to fit whatever this company is looking for. And I go
Sure.
into the interview and I'm like, I'm going to say exactly what they want me to say so I can get the job. Like, that's not who I am. I'm not the person who's just going to say whatever to please whoever I'm talking to. I'm going to throw the tough questions. I'm going to challenge things because just because it's the way it's been doesn't mean it's the way it needs to be or should be moving forward.
Right. Right.
And I think because of that, a lot of companies didn't necessarily want to take a, I guess you could say, a chance with me. Right? They want a student who's going to come in from school and just be like, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. Like, I will do this work. I will go do these things and have them on your desk. Yep, I'm not going to question it. Like, I cannot stand that. I cannot stand a manager who's always like, is it done yet? Did you do this yet? Why did you do it this way? Like,
Yeah.
so yeah, I applied to, I don't know. I honestly don't know, like 20, 30
Yeah.
jobs, something in that ballpark
Yeah.
throughout like middle of senior year through the summer.
Sure. I mean,
Um,
I think that mentality you have is kind of what everybody kind of wants to be. I think. I mean, most students and recent grads, want to be themselves in a job application. However, I mean, right now it's not the easiest time to find jobs, so people are kind of willing to shift their own,
mhm.
personality and strategy to, just get a job in the first place. But, I respect that you have that tenacity. What did you do? So what was your like you found the Google spot. Did you change anything up? Did you prepare more? How many interviews did you have to do? Run us through that because that's awesome.
Yeah, the interview process is long and tough. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat that, right? Like, if you don't prepare for an interview with a, whether it's Google or another tech company or another large, international company of any size, if you don't prepare, like, you're not getting the job.
Sure.
Um, right. So I think my process was I had an initial phone screen with a recruiter. We like just talked about the job, and basically it's like the recruiter just making sure you're not bullshitting your resume and like you
Sure.
actually can hold weight in a conversation about whatever you're applying to. And then I had two phone interviews. Obviously, this was like non-COVID, so like
Yeah,
it
yeah.
looks different now.
So now it's Zoom or Google Hangout, sorry.
Yeah, everything's on Google Meet now. But yeah, two phone interviews, and then I had three Google video call or Google Meet,
Mm.
as it now is called, interviews or like Skype interviews, if you
3?
will. Three, yep.
Okay.
So like the first round was a recruiter call. The second round was the two phone interviews. The third round was the three video calls.
Holy shit.
And then you go to what's called the fourth round. You're kind of you don't really have anything to do with the fourth round. It goes to a hiring committee where like a non-biased group of folks looks at all your feedback from your interviews that you did and like gives you the thumbs up or the thumbs down or the needs more information
Whoa.
brought in. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yep. So yeah, it's really interesting, but and then hopefully you get an offer after that.
Yeah. What I mean, so when you were a part of the university program, were you doing any of these interviews yourself?
No, the university programs team works more like if we if you want to talk about the sales funnel for a quick second, right? Like the top of the sales funnel is the brand awareness stage.
Yep.
The university programs team is the brand awareness stage in the
Mm,
consumer journey to like apply and get a job at Google.
gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I remember I've attended a couple of those Google Meet those workshops in Greg Hall at U of I remember. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that was like kind of what you were doing, kind of like describing the program, building awareness of it.
Yeah, I dealt with a lot of the logistics on the back end of folks who were moving across the country,
Yeah.
engineers and non-engineers, and I was doing a lot of data work for the team as well. Um, right, there's a lot of number crunching involved. Um, so that was kind of my role within the team. But yeah, the team as a whole, you're exactly right. The folks who are coming to campus to talk with students, both engineers and non-engineers, about, hey, have you considered a career in tech? Have you considered a career at Google?
I think, yeah, but that's not that. I mean, you talk about awareness. I mean, I think most people are pretty aware if they're on a college campus that Google is a major player.
You know, I thought that too. I really did, right? And then you look at it, and in the advertising, we'll talk business for a second, right? If you're a
Yeah.
business advertising student, um, yeah, you're aware Google's a major player, but you might not be aware you can have a career at Google because you think that it's an engineer, like you have to be an engineer to work at Google. And that,
Right.
to be honest, that was the impression I was under when I was a student. It's like, I would love to work at a tech company. How the hell do I do it? Like,
Yeah.
like, do they do a lot of advertising sales stuff? I don't know. We do, and so do many other tech companies. For those of you listening, but
Yeah.
like that's part of it. And then the other part is on the like engineering side, which was the team I sat on. Um, you have schools like U of I that have the top CS program in the country, or like the top two or whatever CS
Sure.
program in the country, where for those students, it's not, can I get a job at a big tech company? It's, what big tech company am I going to go work at?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So
Right.
then
Right.
it
Right.
becomes a whole different ball game of like,
Right.
yeah, we know you want to work in big tech, but like,
Yeah.
why should you come work for us versus Facebook or Amazon or Microsoft,
Right. Right.
who
Right.
are huge players in the university hiring game?
That's where it gets real fun, I bet.
Yeah. There's
Man, that's awesome. But I think for the purpose of this, I mean, I would love to have a side combo about like what that's like recruiting the engineers, because that's just a world I've never even thought of. But for the purpose of this podcast,
Yeah.
let's talk about that sales. Let's talk about that business, that advertising side. What are some of those jobs that students listening now that, like yourself, they might not want to go the traditional creative agency route? Um, what are some of those opportunities, whether it's at Google specifically or tech companies around the country?
Yeah. I'll start with the broader answer and then narrow it down. But
Sure.
every tech company, every tech company has folks in marketing and has folks in advertising and PR, right?
Sure.
It just, a big company of any, no matter what the service or product is, has those functions. Otherwise, they really can't generate revenue or profit. Right. So Google obviously has a lot of advertising and sales opportunities. Everywhere you look on the internet, you're on YouTube, Google supported ads. You're on
Hmm.
search, Google supported ads. You're
Oh
on
yeah.
random websites, like those ads are powered by Google and Google Ads. Even if you're going to work in an agency, you're
Yeah.
going to probably work with Google Analytics and
Yeah.
Google
Yeah.
AdSense, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
like it's the digital era. Welcome. If
Yeah.
you're
And
not
Google
here,
runs
like
it.
yeah, and if you're not in the digital era, I don't know where you've been the past 5 years, but um,
Newspaper's pretty nice too.
I hate newspaper. I think I'm allergic to it.
Good one.
It makes me sneeze a lot. Anyways, right? Same thing with Facebook. There's ads all over Facebook and Amazon, and there's teams, huge teams that are diving into the analytics of how their algorithms are processing the advertising they're running or that agencies are running on their platforms. And they need people to work with large agencies and small businesses and everything in between to make sure that folks who are spending money are actually getting a good ROI on the campaigns they're running.
Right.
Right? That could come in a form of like an advertising sales role where you're trying to sell the ad space. It could
Yep.
come in a more of a consultative role of like, hey, you should change these things about your campaign or consider these keywords instead because they're going to return, X, Y, or Z. Um, and then you have the internal side of it too, where you have folks like Google has a bunch of hardware products, and we need a marketing team to come up with what those campaigns are going to look like. Even if they are partnering with an extra, a third party agency,
Agency, yeah.
we still need, a marketing department who is going to hold that agency to the standards and the story that we're trying to tell as a company. Um, Same thing with PR. Like the bigger the company, the more PR you're going to have to work with. The bigger the nightmares,
Absolutely.
the bigger the fires, right? So
Yep.
there are all of these roles. Now, however, if you're a university student who is graduating, don't hate me for saying this, but you probably will not land a marketing or PR, role like that at a big company. They're not going to take a student who hasn't worked full time at a company doing PR or marketing before and put them, to manage like the Google Pixel launch from the
Yeah.
marketing perspective or the PR perspective, right? Like
Yeah.
that's not a project you have a second chance on. That's not something you can mess up.
Yeah, it's big leagues.
It's big league stuff. However, you can still get an advertising job out of college at Google. Just working on campaigns, working on working on consulting advertising campaigns
Sure.
with businesses. Right, there's a bunch of my friends started in sales up in Ann Arbor, in Michigan. We
Yeah.
have a sales office there that most of that office is entry level sales roles. A lot of people come out of Michigan. A lot of people come from U of I and Northwestern and just like the Midwest
Ooh, that
region.
sounds like a fun program. What's that about?
I don't have like specific details, obviously, because I wasn't
Sure.
part of the program, but you work with small businesses. They're like the small business sector. They've recently
Ah,
rebranded,
just like
right?
Amazon's program.
Yeah, I'm sure they do it very similarly, right? Like
Yeah.
low stakes, low risk, but you learn how the process works. And
Right.
then as you get promoted and you move up and you transfer roles, like you take on bigger and bigger clients and bigger budgets, right? But
Sure.
it's like if someone is running $100 per month campaign, right?
Hmm.
Like, and you mess up a keyword, it's not that big of a deal. Like you can fix it,
Right.
right? Versus like, a Walmart or Nike or Coca-Cola who's spending
Yeah.
millions of dollars
Yeah.
and you mess it up,
Right.
right? If you're a university grad, you have no excuse for messing up a campaign on Walmart, you know? But
Hmm.
if you're a university grad and you mess up a random campaign that's was only $100, like you make it right with the client and you move on, and it's not going to hurt our bottom
Right.
line.
Yeah. I think Google can, help out with that if you mess up with a $50 to $100 campaign.
Right.
Worst case scenario.
Maybe I'm missing the mark on the actual numbers.
No,
I'm
but I get
sure. Yeah.
right. I get what you're saying. So that's awesome. I mean, then I think that pretty much highlights that question then. So what made you specifically a good candidate for Google?
That's like
What
my
was the experience that you built up? What was your personal brand? What did you do in college? Did you DJ at all? Were you a great DJ that cares about audio? What and create awesome experiences? I don't know. That's just a guess.
yeah. It's like I'm being interviewed all over again for this role. No, I'm messing. Yeah. So I can dive into like how I built my personal brand to
Mhm.
be what it is today. And a lot of that, I know you mentioned DJing, and that's a very big part of my life. It still is. Um, so like I'll jump back like several years here.
Yeah,
My first job that I ever had was DJing. I worked for myself. I didn't want to work for anyone when I was younger. Like I didn't want to have a shift job at a restaurant or a retail store. Like that wasn't me.
sure,
Um, and I was like, how I got into music and DJing, that's a whole nother podcast.
sure,
But
sure.
yeah, that was my first job. I started Rumble Entertainment. I think I was in seventh or eighth grade. And I started DJing like Sweet 16s and bar mitzvahs and backyard parties and birthday like all that kind of stuff. Um, and that's where like it was like guerrilla marketing,
Sure.
of learning how to put an event together. And, first I was charging like $200 to come do your 3 hour, 4 hour party because I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And you know what? Low risk, low reward for the client.
Sure.
You in the entertainment industry, you get what you pay for. So if you're paying $200, you're going to get $200 worth of value. And as I figured it out, I started charging more and more and more and realizing that this is great. Like I could sit here and guide the client through like a templated line of questioning that's going to, psychologically make them pick the things that I'm the best at, like the best
Yeah.
add-ons for their party or whatever. Because those are things that I know I can deliver on at a high quality. And so like
Nice.
that's how I got into events and DJing. When I was in high school, that was my main source of like high school job income.
Yeah. Better than
I
washing dishes.
Yeah, it is better than washing dishes. I also was like fortunate enough to go to a large high school where there is a large like tech theater and AV department, and they would hire like a couple of students to work there full time for like every high school has those things that get the auditorium gets rented out at night or on the weekends or like.
What high school you go to?
I went to Stevenson High School in
Nice.
Lincolnshire, Illinois.
Yeah. Good test scores there.
That's what they say. I don't know if how mine fall on the
Did yours contribute to that narrative of
I was probably one of the students they wanted out of the school.
Yeah.
And I did like some event management and audio and video engineering for those random things where like regular staff didn't want to like come in on a Saturday to like do this like simple thing, but like they would hire me to go run a couple mics and a camera and like,
nice.
That'll be that.
You could do a podcast easily.
I like being a guest on podcasts. I don't know how I would do hosting a podcast.
No, you'd be fine.
Thanks. So yeah, events and stuff. And that's how I got to college. And my freshman year of college, I did not do well. I was rushing a fraternity, which took up a lot of my time, but it wasn't like necessarily the most productive time. And I was actually going into my sophomore year, I was actually put on academic probation, which I don't remember what the limit at U of I is for that. But anyways, I started noticing, right? Because like my freshman year of high school, I was in a very similar position where I was not doing very well academically until I like overflowed my plate with co-curricular activities, right?
Sure.
Just for some reason, like when I'm really busy, I have historically done better at like things. I don't know why that is. I don't have a scientific reason, but that's just what has worked for me. So I knew like going into my sophomore year that I needed to go find things on campus that wasn't my fraternity. Like I loved my fraternity. I was involved in Greek life. I was on my executive board, but I needed more to keep me busy. So then I went over to WPGU 107.1 FM. Shout out Illini Media. And I was a marketing intern for a couple months there. And then the marketing director was leaving and they're like, hey, we need a marketing director. Ross, nice. Do you want to apply for it? Okay, I guess. Like, sure. I don't like at that point, I was like, I don't know what qualifications I have to be a marketing director, but you asked me to apply, so I will. And I did that. And I put together a street team. I don't know if it exists still or not, but we were able to start selling like off-site brand activations where we would go to companies or on-site broadcast live from like, oh, we're broadcasting live from the Harvest Market in Champaign. It's so like that was the kind of stuff I put together for WPGU. It was like a no-brainer. All the major market radio stations were doing it. We weren't. So again, events there. I was also a DJ in college. I shout out Red Lion.
Nice.
Shout out Jason Rita.
Take that out.
Okay, take that out. Cut it out.
No Jason Rita on this show.
But I had my first shift there sophomore year. But before sophomore year, I DJ'd at Joe's when I was only 18. For those that don't know, the bar age in Champaign is 19, so they had me on payroll, and I wasn't even legally allowed to be there.
What? I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, I was DJing Monday Night Joe's my the second half of my freshman year, and like no one ever asked to see an
No.
ID, no one ever asked to see it. I was just like, okay, he's the DJ.
Yep.
Um,
Nice.
and then my friend John Schuster was a bartender and DJ at Red Lion. He now is like blowing up. He goes by John Summit. Go look him up. He's got a great like house music producer.
Sure.
Got me my first shift, and then at the end of my sophomore year, they asked if I would be the head DJ
Let's go. Nice.
for Lion, and that entails like shift planning. At that time, like Cochrane owned Lion and
Yep.
Clyde's and Firehouse, and at that point, like every bar had DJs rotating through every night. So
Yeah.
like, my responsibility was just shift, make sure the better DJs are playing like the Thursday, Friday, Saturday shifts, and like you have
Right.
the rest of the DJs cycle through so they could learn. So the following year they can play the big nights, and that was fun. So again,
Maintain.
like yeah,
That's
like
funny.
planning like I don't know if they still do, but there's like a weird happy hour thing that would happen on Fridays at Lion. Um,
Giveaways.
yeah, like 4 o'clock or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So
remember that.
I helped put that together.
I attended that. I was there for that. Don't you worry.
Yeah, I love
Pizza, the eating contests, those are funny. But hey, let's shift away from this real quick because we don't have much time left. I did want to ask you, so if you, I'll let you summarize that all. But I mean, obviously your experience, not working for the system in a way, right? Creating
Yep.
these experiences based on who you are and what you wanted to do. You were able to kind of, create your own path. Is that fair to
Mm-hmm.
say?
Yeah, that is very fair.
And is that kind of the status quo? Is that the standard at Google? You hear these similar stories of your employees and your coworkers?
I don't think it's necessarily the status quo. I think you hear these stories more at Google than you do at other companies.
Mm.
But it's by no means like the way in.
Yeah,
Like there's just as many people who worked for the system for 20 years who came over
sure.
to Google, later in their career. It's just a matter of, how you want to brand yourself and set yourself up for success. And for me, this is the way that worked well for me because this is how I felt the most productive in my own life.
Yeah.
If you listening, like if your most productive way to contribute to your career and to society is to work for the system, then work for the system and kick ass. Like that's you. But yeah, I think there are more people at Google who have my kind of stories and unique backgrounds than traditional agencies and companies have.
Gotcha. So then, final words of advice for anybody looking to get a job specifically at Google, maybe in a similar path that you took, or any resources they should start learning about now.
Yeah, Google specific resources, google.com/students has like internships and entry level job postings, and you could set up like job alerts there and apply directly through there. Also, if you're going into the advertising world, I think it's skillshop.withgoogle.com has certifications on like Google Ads, Google Analytics, stuff like that, where like if you're in the advertising world and you're applying to an advertising role at Google, like you probably should have done your research and spent a little time on these certifications.
Yeah.
Right there. I mean, the training in the role is great. Like you're going to get trained how to do all this stuff on the job, but having that is great. Showing the initiative that you had it. Those are like the two really good Google specific resources. In general, like resumes are big, right? It's your 7 seconds of fame to make an impression. You have 7 seconds to make an impression on someone, right? Whoever you're talking to or whoever is reading your resume, they're going to determine within the first 7 seconds if they like you or don't, if you're a qualified candidate or not. Like this goes beyond the business world. So a big thing with resumes that I see, especially from the business advertising world, is a lot of these resumes are lacking impact. And what I mean by that is, that's great that you ran a campaign for Coca-Cola as an intern. I'm reading that as a recruiter at another company who's never worked with Coca-Cola before. What's the significance of that to me? Like,
Sure.
I can sit here and go, okay, so maybe like like no, I ran a multimedia campaign across 4 platforms that reached 5,000 people that resulted in whatever OKR. Like
Mhm.
these are the details that need to be on resumes, because otherwise I or some other recruiter is going to read it and just go, okay,
What
and
does it mean? Yeah.
right. Especially if you are doing a jump cross-functionally, right? If you came from the advertising space and you're going to work or you want to apply for roles that aren't traditional advertising, you need to give that context.
Right. Right.
Also be yourself. Like I can't tell you the amount of people who ask to have coffee chats with me and are just bullshitting left and right. I don't know if I can swear on this podcast, so I apologize.
Absolutely.
Um,
Encouraged.
but like, don't bullshit. Like, people we know, like everyone in the industry can read right through it. Don't have a coffee chat with someone just because you want to have a coffee chat with them so you can say you talked to someone from Google or Facebook or Amazon. Like, you should do your research before you have those chats and be humble, be honest, be approachable. Don't be like, I'm too good for this, like why don't I have a job at XYZ company. um and that feedback might be like shocking, but the
That
amount of people,
happens?
oh yeah, it happens to me, my friend, it happens to my friends at other companies that aren't tech companies.
Not my listeners, not our breaking and entering listeners, that's for
No,
sure.
I would hope not. If they're listening to the podcast, they're already doing something right because they're listening to folks from the industries who can help them.
Thank you.
um yeah, and the other thing would be like, do your research. Do your research. Like, you're going to get asked questions in interviews about the company you're interviewing for. And it's not like, for Google, for instance, it's not like, oh, what are 3 products and services like that Google offers? Like, that's great if you could list those, but that's not what I'm talking about. I mean, like, if there's a way for, I mean, advertising specific, right? If I own my small business, how can I go advertise at Google? Do I have to have an account manager? Can I go do it myself? Like, all that
Mhm.
information is out there, right? We live in a digital age. Every company has this kind of
Yeah.
information on the
Google
internet. Yeah, literally, Google it.
it.
That's google.com for those of you who haven't entered the digital era yet.
Yep. I love it. I love it. Awesome. All right. Then that pretty much wraps up what the questions I have. To finish off with the interview, we just want to make sure that people can reach out to you and they know the appropriate way to do so. So, do you want, I mean, is that allowed? Is LinkedIn the best way to do it? If anybody wanted to reach out to say hello or talk to you, how do they go about that?
Yeah, if it's from a professional perspective, LinkedIn is great. I think my email is also listed on LinkedIn, which is
Okay.
just rossbessinger@gmail.com. That's my personal one. You know, if you want to talk, I'm always happy to talk with people. If you want to talk music stuff or that kind of world, like Ross Aaron Music on Facebook and Instagram, I'm always popular there.
Nice.
Um, so yeah, I'm happy to talk about all aspects.
Cool. Then we'll make sure to keep those links on in the description or on our graphics on Instagram at entering ad. That really wraps it up. So have a great day. Thank you so much again, Ross. This was
Hey,
awesome.
thanks for having me. This was fun.
Rock and roll. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this entire episode of the Breaking and Entering podcast. This was a great episode with Ross Bessinger. I hope you enjoyed it. Google guy, he is the man. Please reach out to him and go to our Instagram at entering ad for his information. Thank you to Mikey Malarkey, to Buchan Jong, and our Midnight Oil University of Illinois student agency team. Can't do it without you guys. We will see you next week with another amazing guest. Have a good one.